So can you tell me your name and where you're from?
Full name?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. My name is Lorenzo Frepoli. I'm from Pennsylvania.
How is it being queer in Pennsylvania?
I would say, and this is something I experienced kind of coming to Florida, um, there is a much bigger community here, I would say, which I would never expect because what I would hear about Florida up north was always like, it's just Hicks and Republicans, and I wasn't aware of like the culture that existed here. But yeah, I would say my experience was pretty negative in Pennsylvania, mostly out of just like a lack of spaces. I feel like especially for younger queer people, it's very limiting. I think now that I'm over 18 and I can go to clubs, that really helped kind of establish that sense of community. But I think for queer kids under that age, it's very lonely.
So you mentioned that it was surprising for you that Florida has such a large queer community.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about like why that surprises you? And you mentioned a little bit about like a stereotype.
Yeah.
Do you think that those stereotypes are true? Sorry, I asked two questions, but
No, of course. I don't think those stereotypes are really any more applicable to Florida than they are in Pennsylvania. I mean, a lot of the things I would hear about Florida growing up of like, like the Florida man joke, and it's very backwater, not very like educated. It's just not, I mean, the places I was living in Pennsylvania were more of that than I experienced in Florida, you know what I mean? I feel like what Florida has that Pennsylvania and a lot of northern states kind of lack is that kind of foundational like Black and Hispanic culture that really does kind of uphold a lot of the queer community, especially here in Florida. And I think that was kind of the big like eye-opening moment when I came here.
have you had any moments of feeling not accepted here as a queer person?
I would say, yeah, uh, more so in Sarasota. Um, I've never really been treated poorly walking around like Tampa, all, femmed up or anything, but I've been called like faggot several times just walking in downtown Sarasota as myself. I don't know if that's like a demographic thing or like an age thing, but that is my experience.
So, do you feel safe?
I I think I have the privilege of living in a bit of a bubble where I'm at right now, being that this is a private institution. I have, several friends at New College that are queer and are facing a lot more kind of issues that I am at the moment. And, a big kind of source of community that I was finding in the past couple years was the club scene in Tampa, and that's also definitely at risk from the legislation that's being passed. Just in general, with kind of the laws and the rhetoric that our current president's been passing, that queer people are predatory, that queer people are trying to target kids. These are these especially affect people like drag queens and their careers, and where they can perform, how they can perform. Clubs always kind of used to be this safe space for all that, but it's no doubt that as these legislations kind of continue, I can definitely see more crackdowns on like local clubs and local queer communities, just like there were in like the 80s. You know what I mean?
What made you comfortable with the fact that you were gay? Was there like any role models for you?
Hmm. That's a difficult question, I think. With the internet kind of growing up in that period, it was definitely, I definitely knew that I wasn't the only one, but in my kind of area, where I was living, especially as a kid, it doesn't matter how many coming out videos you watch on YouTube or like message boards you're a part of. If the people around you don't reflect who you are, then like it really doesn't register, So I think for a long time, um, mostly until maybe my senior year of high school, or even when I came to Florida, I was pretty kind of locked off to my queerness. And I think there's levels to it too. Because there's accepting that I'm gay, which is that I like men, but there's also accepting queer culture and my presentation and how I choose to kind of materialize my queerness. So I think those are kind of different layers to the experience.
Can you talk about the layers?
Well, like I just said,
no. I want you to go. I want you to go a little bit more.
Yeah, of course.
I want you to talk about specifically how you present yourself and how that affects you.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, when I got to senior year of my high school, I think I just started kind of experimenting with makeup for the first time, with, makeup and crop tops and jewelry. Those were like my trifecta when I was starting out. Especially, actually, oh my gosh, nail polish, I totally forgot. That was like the gateway, because it's not too imposing, it's not too offensive. Especially nowadays, I feel like it's kind of trendy for straight men to paint their nails. But as I started easing like into these deeper layers, I guess, of acceptability, so going from things like nail polish to like hairpins to like makeup and crop tops and skirts and all these other, things that made me appear just visibly queer, the way I was treated kind of changed a lot. I think I found it kind of harder to make friends, but at the same time, people would almost like treat me like I was like brave. But in my mind, I'm like, I'm just being me. I don't know what's so brave about, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that kind of set this precedent in my mind, which lasted for a couple years of like, I have to always be the most, queer, gay person of myself that I can imagine. When I came to college, that was a big thing of like, I'm always gonna wear pink and my whole wardrobe is gonna be pink and femme. And while I do love that part of me, I think what I also realized down the line was that, I don't necessarily need to prove my queerness to anyone, I'm just as queer dressed like this, in a t-shirt and jeans than I am in like full glam,
Have you, in your community or in your network of queer people, how do you think what's going on right now in politics is affecting them? Like, have you talked to them? Have you had any conversations with them, and what are they saying?
Definitely, yeah. It's definitely on the top of people's minds, being that my boyfriend, not only is he gay, but he's also a son of Hispanic immigrants, and a lot of my friends, they identify as transgender. Like, these are communities that are directly impacted, more so than I am, by this legislation. And I've definitely had conversations, especially with my trans friends, like Cree, for instance. We've had a lot of conversations about where this legislation is heading. Something that I kind of worry about for my friends is, access to hormones and these things that, I I can't necessarily relate to, but I'm there to support them as much as I can. But yeah, it's definitely scary. Um, it's less of a I'm scared for myself, I think, in that I'm scared for my friends and my community at large, and kind of how that impacts them.
So, I've heard you talk about like the type of work you want to do is kind of like activism
Yeah,
ish. Can you talk about can you talk about that?
yeah. Um, I think kind of a driving force that's always pushed a lot of my art and now my design as I've kind of pivoted careers has been kind of my identity and my voice, and how can I kind of open up the space not just for me but for people in my community, and really do something that I think makes a difference. I think with our current kind of system, political, economic, it's very easy to fall into this idea that everything we do has to be sold, and it has to be, it has to appeal to a mass audience, and it has to be digestible, and not too offensive, not too controversial. But I think art by nature is political. I think it is controversial. I think just the basic choice of not choosing to do these um, make design choices that maybe lean a bit more towards activism, or associating yourself with I guess more unconventional ideas and causes. um, I think that's a choice that people can make, and I think unfortunately I will have to kind of put my own feelings aside when it comes to getting a job. And um, I'm aware that not everything I do for money necessarily has to be reflective of myself, but I think it's um, I don't know, I think it's very limiting to expect um, queer people, anyone from kind of a marginalized group, to just conform and um, try to represent an experience that they're not necessarily a part of all the time. We need, as human beings, we need that outlet, and I think art and design, I don't think they're any different. I think design can be just as expressive. I think it can have just as much of a voice. I don't think it always has to be to sell something.
So I know that for one of your projects now, your like thing is about HIV.
Hmm.
Can you talk about that, and can you give the girls some facts about HIV?
Of course. So I actually learned quite a bit with my research in this project, primarily that Miami-Dade, Fort Lauderdale, that kind of region is the number one in HIV cases in Florida, and that the top three, um, the top three states with the highest rates of HIV also happen to be the three states with the highest diversity index, which definitely tells me that this is kind of intentional, because a lot of these cases, you see them in more impoverished communities, more communities with higher rates of, Black and Hispanic and these more marginalized demographics. Um, I found this statistic that was really shocking, which is that 1 in 82 Miami adults has HIV.
Wow.
Yeah, your average club might get like over 1,000 patrons a night.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so that's a lot.
That is wow.
And as these resources get harder and harder to access, I worry that that'll be kind of a problem that comes back. You know, people not being able to access PrEP, just like people aren't being able to access, you know, birth control and all these other necessary medications. Trump recently removing foreign aid from a lot of impoverished countries that was supplying them with PrEP, with birth control, with all these things that, you know, people need to survive. You can't just go off PrEP. You can't just go off hormones. I mean, it's almost like an intentional genocide.
Wow. Wow. Very strong choice of words. Um, I think I'm going to conclude the interview. You did a great job. Is there anything that you would like to say?
Yeah, that I think just, you know, in this troubling time as queer people, it's important to not lose your voice and um, just, you know, stand by your community as much as you can.